contained. And so I was going to show you another one, but I'm short on time. I will just flash through another piece that is finite and unbounded, which, because Hans-Ulrich's coming on any minute, is a piece of art installation I've done in America and in Tokyo. It's called Hedge. It stands up out of chains, and it's made out of the void. It actually is a construction that has been geared by the void. And the void keeps driving through. And if I take a cut, the zeros show all the void. So there's very few ones here, here. And those little bits are solid. I dematerialize again, pixelating. And then even that is hollowed out. And then the surface of that is taken away further so that it's 90% void. Then I put it all back together, put in aluminum plates, stainless steel chains, and the chains hold the plates up. And it creates space that you can walk, live in, do whatever. And as you home in, though, this ambiguity of chain and plate forms like jewelry, fabulous moments. And a new incarnation in Tokyo. You see the plates just fly, they're disembodied, and everywhere you look, you can never quite contain the space. So all this work is starting from a random point, an unknown moment, and then moving through the structure of probability and chance through an algorithm to a certainty. So the manifestation, the actual event, the concreteness has been charted from the random and through. Now we work by instinct, and if you work by instinct without using these methods, you're basically, the legacy of what's built is in the certain area. So we are drawing our image and references from here. And if we work by instinct, we're usually jumping around this area. We never get to chart the full distance from the random to the certainty. And the algorithmic process, the abstract process, the emergent process allows to do that. And this area of charting from the unknown to the known is interesting over the years. Before the Greek civilization, our unit of measure was rhythm. Our design system was ritual, and our system of order was superstition. Then came the Greek civilization, and the superstition turned the principle of order turned into number structures. The system of design turned into a eurythmia, a balancing of the golden section and proportional forms, and rhythm became ratio, still rhythmic. In our age, it's reduced to that the measure is only scalar, it's a dimension, it's a length. The system has become framed, and our order is linear. And what I've been investigating is that the rhythm comes back in to the way we form, rhythm and proportion comes back. The frame has opened into a complex network, and so that our system of order is complex now. It's not simplistic, it's complex, which is a wholly different thing to engage with. And that enables us to write new codes in architecture. So I would like to, I don't know how Hans is going to come on now. Gonzalo, I've finished. Thank you. How are we getting Hans on now? Oh, I have to escape button. So anyway, I tried to rush that. I hope that wasn't too fast to get Hans, because he has to go, so we need him. Oh, there he is. Hi, Hans.
Hello, Cecil.
Hello, greetings from Porto.
Hello, greetings to Porto. How are you? Can you hear me?
Yeah, fantastic. You're big as life on a big screen in the whole of the concert hall.
Wonderful. So hello to everybody. I'm really very sorry not to be there, but I'm there by Skype and also by telepathy. and very exciting to listen to the lecture, Cecil. So I was thinking, because we've done many interviews before, I was thinking today it would be interesting, obviously, to go into certain things you mentioned in the lecture. But before that, I wanted to ask you about your beginnings, to somehow begin with the beginnings. And in a previous interview we did, you mentioned some of your mentors, some of your influences. Obviously, Ove Arup was very important for you. You said that he was somehow your critic, he was a mentor. But I'm sure that your influences came from many other fields. They came from science, they came from architecture, engineering. Could you tell us a little bit who were your influences, your triggers?
I think my main influence at the beginning was just without a critical idea, Chopin. Just a complete sort of immersion in Chopin's music, because my mother was a pianist, and that's all I heard from the age of 2 or 3. But when I became more critically aware, I think it then turned into Bach. And that's been a lifelong addiction with Bach's music. So, and then Newton. I started reading, as I became more scientifically involved and I learned the language of mathematics, then I found I was privileged to read Newton in a way that a biography couldn't do. And then, of course, Einstein. So it's been these people who are, I would like to think, suddenly startle the world with a new thought. Of course, they're built on past traditions. If you look at the early work of Borai and all those people, Einstein's work is not so surprising. But the astounding move was, of course, putting in the speed of light into energy transformation. That mass was energy. It was that, and then at a more professional level, I suppose, was Borromini and Brunelleschi, but Borromini a lot. I didn't actually have any architectural heroes or anything as such. I think it was more just seeing that it's hard enough to make things happen, and I admired, of course, certain architects who managed to do work and engineers, but traditionally, I suppose Euler as a mathematician, and who was a genius at a subtle way of thought. What I loved about Euler was that he combined arithmetic and geometry in a way that was totally counterintuitive and against all the norms of doing that work. And I found was also very intriguing, some of the work that never got built, and Viollet-le-Duc. So those sort of sources, Hans. It's a multiplex.
It's a fabulous list. And somehow I was also curious, because when I interview scientists, I've recently interviewed Mandelbrot, and he was telling me about his epiphany to have somehow discovered fractals. And a couple of years ago I was interviewing Albert Hoffmann about the moment when he had the epiphany of the discovery of LSD. So I think an interesting way often to structure interviews and beginnings is through epiphanies. And I was somehow curious, I mean, there are many epiphanies in your work, but I was reading, and you also told me in a previous conversation that something happened in the early 70s in relation to the Sydney Opera House, where you really had an epiphany. Can you tell us about this epiphany in relation to Uzan?
Well, it was more, it was at the time that the Opera House was obviously creating a kind of new paradigm, and it was being done in my office. I had just joined Ovarup, and it was being done by other people. But this idea that there was a football, a surface of a football, that could be cut into shapes, and then the shapes taken off that surface that had a constant curvature, but then assembled in many interesting ways. The idea that this sort of random picture could be simply based on one rigorous idea, and that a scientific approach, not so much even a sort of rigorous approach, could give this massive release to architecture. That was one moment. The other moment was not so much epiphanic or whatever, it was more a Damascene moment of rejection, when I was just working one day, making another frame work, and I was probably 35 or something, and I had this utter disgust with what I was doing, complete revulsion, like physical, and I couldn't progress at all. I could not progress. I had to get up, phone my wife and said I was feeling ill, and I went home. I think we lost. So, and that was for me the key moment that changed in a way. I could not live with myself anymore doing a frame as a complete reductive absurdity. I then started reversing that and moving into architecture, sequencing space. And that went on to compiling the interval.
So that was, one can say, this epiphany to go beyond this idea of compartmentalized space. And then there is obviously also epiphany about self-organization, this whole idea of self-organization. I was wondering how, if for example, Varela was important for you and the whole idea of autopoiesis.
Sorry, Franz, I didn't get that.
Yeah, I mean, the epiphany you've just described has, I suppose, to do with this idea of going beyond the Cartesian logic of sort of compartmentalized space. Mm-hmm. But another epiphany you've talked a lot about is this idea of self-organization entering. And yeah. I was wondering what triggered this, if there was a moment of epiphany, and if Varela...
yes, it was. Yeah. What happened was, of course, like everybody else at the time, in the late 70s, early 80s, I read chaos theory and Mandelbrot's wonderful diagrams of the fractal sets, and the discovery that this was only a simple recursive idea that led to this amazing world, a whole universe, a new universe. And, but it remained something to be attracted to intellectually. But the moment came for me was when I was doing a stadium for Germany in Chemnitz for a competition, which I won. And in the process of that design, I wanted to make, instead of having a stadium roof that converged to the middle, to have a stadium roof that orbited somehow. And in that, I went back to a cycloid, where you have a disk with a dot, and you track the light as the disk rolls, and you get these curves, which are called cycloids. And suddenly I found, Hans, that within my hands, as it were, I was having the emergent properties of either total chaos, where the trace came to meaninglessness in terms of building a form, or it amazingly turned into symmetry almost. And I was totally shocked, completely shocked. And that was the moment that I completely became a complexist, or whatever you want to call that. I embraced the entire idea that there was a generic that was huge, enormous, and that the Cartesian, the narrow, the reduction model was only one particular subset. So that if the generic of space was a loop, that the specificity of squaring the loop became only one point of a bigger agenda. And that's where I've stayed firmly rooted, and all the work since, including Serpentine Pavilion, has convinced me of that path.
Now, another epiphany we haven't spoken yet about is the epiphany of collaboration. The Scottish artist Douglas Gordon talks about a promiscuity of collaboration, and I have the feeling that many of your inventions have been in dialogues, dialogues with architects, dialogues also with artists. So I was wondering if you could tell a little bit about this dialogic principle of working. I mean, there's obviously the dialogue with Rem Koolhaas, there's the dialogue with Libeskind, and more recently and very intensely, the dialogue with artist Anish Kapoor.
Yeah, I think I have always, I think, been open to the fact of, as Rem called it, team. And in SMLX, I think he was going to actually put in a section called team, which didn't get there in the end. But it was first with Jim Sterling in a classical way. I did the Stuttgart Art Gallery and realized it was the first competition I did with him, and we won it, that architecture was a whole new arena of sequence and spatial enclosure that I was interested in. But it was more me learning about architectural complexity with Sterling, working with him. And then with Rem, a very fruitful collaboration over about 18 years, where in one of his buildings with me, which we did here. I think, yes, and then with Toyo Ito, and mainly now with Anish Kapoor, dialogue on space, form, and the reason I work with Koolhaas, with Kapoor, is that I learn things, obviously. And with Kapoor, we talk about event horizon and the structure of disembodied matter that leads to kind of concepts of the cave, almost, where you're blinded to really see. And I think those notions, the deeper philosophic notions of form, are very dear to me. And I think I have a great opportunity with Rem, with Kapoor, with Ito and others to embrace these dialogues, apart from my own practice as well.